Hey everyone, welcome back to True Crime Convos. I am your host, Lanie, host of the True Crime Cases with Lanie podcast, the Crimes of Passion podcast, a Spotify original from Parcast, and the It's Haunted What Now podcast, and the co-founder of the True Crime and Paranormal Podcast Festival. I do a lot of things, as they say. I'm so excited to have everybody here today. I think this is probably one of the first true crime convos that I have good news to share in regards to something related to true crime. As you know, we start off every broadcast, every stream with our ASL. If you are too young to know what an ASL is, you got to go. Okay. So make sure you drop the ASL in the chat. If you're joining us on Spotify Live, YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, wherever we are broadcasting tonight, make sure you are there saying hello in the chat. We are going to be talking about the Adnan Syed motion to vacate, along with the ruling that's happened, and Hay's family, or the family of Hae Min Lee. There's a lot of nuances associated with this case. A lot of people who I have been apparently talking to on TikTok about it. It's been a little interesting. So I'm Lanie. ASL for me is 34, cis female, she, her pronouns, and I am in the Dallas area. Thank you to everybody joining us in the chat. Let's get started with Adnan Syed and what happened. So we saw this motion to vacate come in kind of randomly in, it popped up on Twitter. I saw it. Rabia had mentioned it, and it has been quite a whirlwind. I will say that I have not seen a motion like this turn around so quickly in the court of law. When I first saw the motion to vacate was even submitted, I was astounded that it came from the prosecutor's or the state attorney's office. Second, I anticipated, and I think a lot of people felt this way when they first saw it. Um, I think we anticipated that we probably wouldn't even see a hearing or anything like that until maybe 2023. I don't know if anybody else felt the same way, but I was not expecting such a quick turnaround. And just to give you some background on kind of my history with everything, I listened to Serial when it came out and was very intrigued by the entire case, right? I was hooked. And then when Rabia created Undisclosed, same thing. I've been following this case. And I think for a lot of us who um, have been listening from the beginning with Serial and then with Undisclosed and have been following Rabia on various social medias in her quest to, find justice for Adnan, which and then turns into finding justice for Hae. I think we were all shocked and really wanting to step on eggshells with even wishing for the best outcome. I don't think any of us ever thought that we would see this day. So let's talk about the motion to vacate. It was 25 pages long. And I'm also going to release an episode just for everybody's awareness on the True Crime Cases feed. An episode I did with Charlie from Crime Lines and Whitney and Melissa from Colts Crimes and Cabernet. We talked about this motion and everything, caught our reactions live. It just so happened to be that, but I'm going to release that on our feed today so that everybody can listen in and tune in to kind of hear from the perspective as listeners and not really as podcasters, if that makes sense. So when this case has been kind of in our periphery. It's had its share, I will say, of people who believe that Adnan is guilty of murdering Hae. I'm currently in a TikTok battle, if you will, with somebody, and there are those who, which I fall into that camp, and I think others in the chat too, like Casey, you know, feel that he was railroaded by this system. Um, Oh, yeah, lovely. We do ASL, so it stands for age, sex, and location. It's way back in the day. Oh my gosh, I'm so glad that there's a GIF of it. So welcome everybody. Thank you. So basically the motion to vacate, 25 pages long. I read the entire thing. I'm a nerd for these, these types of things. I'll read motions all day. I would have been a perfect law clerk, if you will. But I read the motion and I was so surprised that this has been going on for a year. And you guys, there is still information that we do not know. Now, Adnan's side of the grass, if you will, the street, Adnan's side of the street has asked those who are using their platform, so podcasters, anybody in the media, etc., to not speculate on the suspects. And so I will be honoring that request and will not dive into who we believe the suspects are. There are some that are kind of obvious does, like if you've been listening, it's that if you know, you know. So I'll just leave that out there for people. I won't be doing any of that speculation. So, in the motion to vacate, they were really careful about the suspects. So, there's two suspects that they mention. One, they kind of go back and forth with like mixing the information about each individual suspect. Um, and you can't really tell if you've never listened to like Serial and if you've never listened to Undisclosed, then you can't really tell like who they're talking about or who they're referring to. But I think the biggest thing, and if you follow Rabia, she said, there's a bombshell, blah, blah, blah. The bombshell hasn't even been revealed yet. And you would think, like, oh, the bombshell's already happened. It was the two alternate suspects. No, it was the suspect may ha- who threatened Hayes' life, right? There was a mention in the affidavit or the filing that there was an individual who threatened Hayes' life, threatened to kill her in front of another person who witnessed it. And they also said they would make her disappear. The Mosby, the state's attorney, said that this person had the means, motive, and opportunity to do so. And I thought that was a bombshell. Turns out it's not. It hasn't even been revealed yet. And then there's another suspect who has had significant crimes against women, in particular, women they know and some women that they don't know. There's also speculation or saying that they found evidence that the person who could have, we don't know which one it is, but whoever had the means, motive, and opportunity also had a family member live who lived like nearby where Hayes' vehicle was found. So to me, it's so shocking, and it shouldn't be, I suppose. I've kind of been jaded by this whole justice system thing. I think I was having a conversation with Mariah Day, and I do also want to talk about young Lee, who's Heyman Lee's brother, and the stuff I was seeing on social media about the Lee family, too, to kind of talk about the family side of this. So, back to the alternate suspect. So we thought that was the big thing. Well, the shocker wasn't that this has been going on for a year, that they've been doing the side investigation um, at all. To me, the turnaround time on when the motion was filed to when the motion was heard and a decision was made was literally a business day. I have never seen that in my life, ever, and I was so shocked. So, this told me that this judge was like, "Listen, if she just did a Nightline interview where she was all like, justice over," I forgot what the line was. If anybody remembers what the line was, put it in the chat. But, Mosby also quoted that in her own argument as well. If she truly is a judge who's just like, "Listen, I don't wanna have another person behind bars on my watch a minute longer, so um, we're gonna hear this, argument tomorrow or basically Monday." Nations also were a thing. So again, if you followed Undisclosed, right, you know who Susan Simpson is. Susan Simpson, was an L2 at the time. She had a blog, I think, The View from L2, but she was a practicing attorney. She also was the person responsible for finding the fax cover sheet, which dispelled the cell phone data, right? Um, I keep forgetting the state's attorney's first name, so I don't want to say, I think it's Carolyn Mosby, but I feel like that could be wrong. So I'm just going to refer to her as State's Attorney Mosby. Um, but Mosby cited in her argument, basically that the cell phone data was unreliable, and it's been basically proven by not only the state's experts, but also outside experts who have no involvement in this case whatsoever, that it was unreliable and that it should not have been used to pinpoint Adnan at Hayes' burial site. The second thing is she completely impeached um, what's his name? Jay Wilde's testimony. And that's kind of the first time we've officially seen the state take a side on Jay Wilde's. And we'll get into that part too, because I have a big issue with that. And I had a lot of questions, but um, I was hearing the Brady violation based on that note that they kept. Yeah. Yeah. So we did a lot on the serial. Thank you. I'm keeping up. Um, Yeah, the cell phone data, right? Like, what I was saying about talking to Mariah Day is that she believed that she was doing the right thing by working with the state, that they were all on the same side of, justice, of wanting to find answers, etc. And what we saw in her case, and unfortunately in Hayes' case, is that that wasn't what happened. If any of you have not yet seen We Own This City on HBO Max, it talks about the gun task force that was in Baltimore City. And if you have not watched it, oh my gosh, please watch it, because it truly does speak to the widespread corruption. There was literally an act passed in Maryland because these officers from the gun task force and other officers were knowingly getting on the witness stand and perjuring themselves. So there was literally a roster of officers and other people in the law enforcement community in Baltimore City who were banned from giving testimony. The AG was aware of it, defense was aware of it. When the federal government came in, they were made aware of it. It's just been ongoing. So it's so ridiculous that it's taken 23 years to point out this corruption. But, you know, as they say, the wheels of justice move slowly, and that's exactly what has happened in this case. So after Mosby makes her arguments, or before she even gets to make her arguments, the counsel that represents the Lee family is really upset and goes before the judge and expresses the concern from the family that they weren't given enough notification to attend the hearing in person, and that they haven't had any notification or fair notification from the state's attorney's office that they were going to file this motion. We find out that they were notified a week prior to the motion being filed, and then they had a week basically to make travel arrangements, if you will. But there were people going in on young Lee, who's Heyman Lee's brother, for expressing his concern that he wasn't there and being like, what difference does it make if he's not there to talk about his sister? I mean, I was seeing the most ridiculous things. And what I like to say is that we can be happy for Adnan and still want justice for Hay, and still remember and engage with empathy when it comes to her family, because like Mariah Day, who her mother was Betsy Faria. If any of you guys are aware of that case, you may have known it from the poorly done Hulu docuseries, The Thing About Pam. But Mariah is in the same boat as young Lee and the rest of Heyman Lee's family, and that they trusted what the prosecution was saying. They trusted that they had the right guy. And for 23 years, they believed they had gotten justice for Hay. But that is not what happened. And so you have to imagine the shock to the system when the people who tell you, we've got it, this is amazing, don't worry about it, turn back around and say, oh, actually, just kidding. Hold on, I need to take a cough break for some reason. Apologies for that. So he was obviously upset. And I have a feeling that the attorney that was representing them told them, like, "Don't worry, we can for sure can get this motion postponed." It's Marilyn Mosby, thank you. "We can get this motion postponed. Don't worry about showing up." I'm almost certain the judge would always want the family member here. And pre-COVID, I'm sure that would be the case. But since we've had so many court systems or so many court hearings done over Zoom, we've moved into kind of this virtual world of accepting that court hearings can happen via Zoom. Then it just makes sense that the judge was like, "No, sorry, he's had a week to make travel arrangements. He can join us on Zoom." And so they went into a recess for 30 minutes so that Young could get off of work and express and make his own statement about how the state was moving forward and the motion to vacate. And understandably so, he was upset, and he said he felt betrayed. I don't think he meant that he felt betrayed by the state filing the motion. I think he meant that he felt betrayed by the initial prosecution saying that they had the guy. I think that he was just very shocked by all of this, and it's, again, understandable. I'm curious to hear what you guys think about Young Lee's response to um, the motion to vacate, and if it's understandable. We have to remember that on the other side of this is Hayes' family, and Adnan thankfully gets to continue his life and hopefully continue it outside of prison walls. Hay does not get that opportunity. So we want to still focus on the fact that Hay is a victim here. She deserves justice. And it's unfortunate that the prosecution and the state focus so much on railroading a teenager in this really corrupt system that was going on in Baltimore City, that they let that be the focus instead of getting true justice for Hay. So, I just want everybody to be aware and cognizant of that they engage again with empathy when it comes to the family and know that it is difficult for them. So, once Young makes his statement, very impactful statement, broke my heart when I was looking at it in real time. I could not even imagine what that feels like, but I'm I I'm glad that he at least got to say something and was at least given the opportunity to speak, and that they didn't decide to postpone it to make sure he was there in person. I think either way, his voice and his words were impactful. Um, it was sobering to see, honestly. So Marilyn Mosby gets up and she makes, her case before the judge, basically kind of reiterating everything within the motion to vacate. Um, I think it's really interesting that they have the DNA evidence, and I think that that's really what she's banking on, is that the DNA evidence is going to exonerate Adnan, and then we're going to have a direction in the suspects, the two alternate suspects who um, possibly are the people responsible for taking Hayes' life and essentially taking Adnan's life too, for not, coming forward. But I wanted to also talk about Jay Wilds, right? Because she completely impeached his testimony. And I was talking about the person I was going back and forth with on TikTok about this, because the first response to me was, "Listen to Serial and you'll see everything, doesn't add up here." And I was like, "I wholeheartedly agree with you. It does not add up here." But it doesn't add up in the sense that it it speaks to Adnan's guilt. So one of the crux of their arguments was that the testimony from Adnan's best friend, aka Jay Wilds, and to him saying like he was in the Best Buy parking lot is justification enough to say that he was responsible for Hayes' murder, and it doesn't negate prosecutorial misconduct, which is a mind-boggling argument. But I'm going to allow that person to live in the world that they live in. What I will say is that I am so glad Marilyn Mosby took a very strong stance in Jay Wilds' testimony. But I also want to harken back to the corruption, right? So I asked around while I was talking with Crime Lines and while I was talking with Colts Crimes and Cabernet. I was asking them, like, why hasn't Jay yet? Now that Marilyn Mosby has made this statement, now that the state essentially has taken this position that the trial for Adnan was unfair, and that he's been wrongly behind bars for 23 years. Why hasn't Jay Wilds come out and said anything? Why hasn't he made a statement to be like, oh my God, thank God, like he's finally out. Now I feel safe enough to say what happened, to say that I was coerced into making this statement. And let's be real, Jay Wilds was young, poor, and Black in Baltimore City. And that corruption favored those people. It loved young, poor people of color because they could be manipulated to do whatever you wanted them to do. And that's really devastating and really sad. And Jay also, I believe, still lives in the city. So he's probably still kind of indoctrinated with this fear of the police and wanting to just keep his head low. Um, and maybe he was coerced to doing that Intercept interview. If you recall, he joined the spine-tingling, disgusting man that is Kevin Urich and joined him to basically give another version of his interaction with Adnan supposedly that day. And stick to his story. Uh, so do I think that we're ever going to hear from Jay Wilds? I don't know. I don't think so. I don't think that he'll ever come out and say like, yes, I was coerced into lying about Adnan. What I think is that he was basically told by the police, like, if you don't say that you saw him or if you don't cooperate, we can basically put you on the hook for murder too, and you'll be serving life alongside Adnan. And I can understand why you would go, tell me what you want me to say. I, I you know, I know everybody's like, you don't know until you're in the situation. So I would agree. I have no idea how I would respond. I would like to think that I'd be like, nope, sorry, find somebody else and whatever. But it's also the city I live in. So I don't know. You guys have to tell me too, kind of what your thoughts are on all of that. But um, yeah, Jay staying away and not making a statement, I completely understand. Um, and the state basically impeaching him means that he can't be used going forward as a credible witness. So everything that he said, all 16 billion stories that he gave, are all now irrelevant. And the people who supposedly corroborate his story are also impeached as witnesses, and they can't be used. Um, and I think that that's incredible. I think that that's amazing. And so this person that I was talking to on TikTok, I'm like, you would have to believe that everything Jay Wild said was correct, right? But which story are you believing? Because he's told so many. So which one are you saying was right? And it's just you can't reasonably pick one and say, I think I'll go with that one without saying, okay, well, what about the other one? What about this one? Because he's made up so many, stories to probably, you know, appease what he thinks is, the people looking at him going, remember what our deal was. And I had asked Bob Mata from Defense Diaries, as you know, he is a former defense attorney, if this would impact any of the deals, so this motion to vacate, if this would impact any of the deals that Jay Wilds made with the state, right? Because he did get, I think, probation, if you will, for um, accessory after the fact. And he basically said that like it's separate, and yeah, like whatever the state did with him is completely separate from Adnan's um, sentence, if you will. So it sucks that there isn't any ramifications on that end um, for Jay either. And maybe if Adnan's um, motion, since it was vacated, if you've been living under a rock and haven't seen like all of your Twitter blowing up and Facebook blowing up and YouTube or whatever blowing up, then you know that Adnan has been released. And I could not believe it when it happened. We were talking and I was like, holy crap, are you kidding me? I didn't want to breathe wrong that day. I didn't even want to hope that he would be out because I was so nervous that, as if I had any type of like, effect on it whatsoever. But I think for those who feel close to this case, they didn't want to like breathe wrong that day in case, it had an impact on the judge. Um, making the call to not vacate the sentence. So I was really glad to see that. It was so powerful to see Adnan walking out of the court with his mom and Rabia right behind him, and his brothers there, and it was so, so, so incredible, to see that, and it was just great. Marilyn Mosby had gotten up to the podium to start giving her statement, and then Adnan had walked out, and she was like, "Nope, focus on that, like, go get your pictures, do whatever, this is what it's all about," and I really appreciated that. I really thought that that was nice because she could have kept going. She could have started her statement. Nobody probably would have been listening to her at the time because everybody, was trying to get the first images of Adnan coming out of the courthouse and stuff. And Rabia had made it clear that she was not going to be giving any statements that day, that it was all about family. And it it was so palpable. It was amazing. I could just imagine that, like, his mom was crying, everything. It was just I still think about it and I'm so moved by that, and it's so wonderful. So then Mosby gets up and she finishes her motion in the court. And then Adnan's attorney, Erica Suter, gets up, literally says, one word. Well, she's like, "Yeah, we've been saying this all along, mic drop," essentially. And then the judge basically says that the motion's been approved, and then says that Adnan needs to be on home confinement. So he's fitted with a monitor, and then he goes home. Um, and then the state of Maryland, which I thought was interesting because they were not happy with Marilyn Mosby filing this motion to vacate. They then say, "Listen, you guys, this stuff is incorrect because all of this information, there were no Brady violations because the case file has always been available and ready for them to look at if they wanted to," which is just like, come on, dude. Like, are you serious? Susan Simpson, okay, again, if you've listened to Undisclosed, you know how detail oriented this woman is. She is the one who found the fax cover sheet, who changed the game for the cell phone evidence. She changed it all. And so Susan was like, "Guys, if it was in there, I would have found it." Colin Miller said the same thing. So it was just like, really, that's what you're going off of? Like, you're still trying to fight this fight and saying that he belongs behind bars and that there was no Brady violations? Come on, dude. Like, biggest eye roll of the century that the state is still trying to live off of that. Um, and I don't know who the mayor was at the time, so sorry, lovely. But yeah, it's great that they have the integrity unit and that they're really trying to make a change. And I was so hopeful that once the judge made that ruling, that this would hopefully encourage other counties, other states to start looking at those cases where people believe somebody has been wrongfully convicted, and do their own diligence and say, "Hey, we may have gotten this wrong. There's been an advancement here. Let's make sure we have the right person." Um, I don't know why they think that's a bad thing. Whitney had asked, why wouldn't they test evidence if they've had it this long? Why would they just sit on it for the whole time? And Bob spoke to this too, because we talked about it with the Stephen Avery case, right? Some convos ago. It's like, what motive do they have? What's in it for them to go and test this evidence? It's not a benefit to the state. It's not a benefit to the prosecutor whose, win record would be affected. Madeline in our chat says they really don't want to be wrong and look bad. Best way to avoid that is to do it right the first time. Agreed. 100% on that. So yeah, it's just mind-boggling to me. But again, the justice system is imperfect, and this is why it needs an overhaul and why it needs reform, truly. And I hope that Adnan's case is really the start of this, and I hope that it encourages other jurisdictions across the United States to do the same thing. Because there's no better PR than saying, like, "Whoops, we got it wrong," and freeing an innocent person and finding the real person people or persons who committed this atrocious act against Heyman Lee. So, yeah, I'm really curious to see how this DNA evidence works. And people were wondering, because there is a 30-day time limit on when the state's attorney's office can basically opt to retry or make it known that they plan to retry Adnan for Hayes' murder. I think that Mosby's waiting for the DNA to come through, but I don't think she has any intention whatsoever to re-prosecute Adnan. Because if she did, if she believed at any point that Adnan was responsible or somehow participatory in Hayes' murder, she would have asked for him to be in pretrial detention, like move him from prison, put him in county jail, and then we'll start retrying him. I think she would have already done that. I don't think she would have released him on his asked for him to be released on his own recognizance and to home confinement, essentially. So we have at least until the next month, October, to see if Mosby does file charges or refile charges against Adnan. I can't see how they would do that because the case itself is flimsy and they have two alternate suspects. They basically have given a clear-cut defense to Adnan. And there's still more information out there that, again, we don't know about. The word on the street is that there is a big bombshell that's going to be released. And I think it has to do with the DNA evidence. The DNA evidence came from, it was touch DNA. So it was technology that wasn't available at the time when the investigation was happening. So the motion mentions, and I, again, want to be respectful. So the motion mentions that DNA was collected from various parts of Hayes' body, including her clothing. They found no evidence of any type of male DNA on any of the places you would expect on the female body for a victim of a homicide, or where you would reasonably look. There was also some DNA, male DNA or trace male DNA found on Hayes' clothing, which makes sense, right? If this person had placed Hay in a trunk or something and then moved her body, it's reasonable to assume that there was going to be some touch DNA. And that person would not have thought to think of that because they may have felt they wore gloves or whatever, however that worked out. So they're doing additional testing on that to determine if it matches any of the other people. But I think it's interesting, too, if we point back to those alternate suspects, that we have two individuals, and it was known at the time that one of the people was a serial rapist, right? Or had been, I think, either accused or already convicted of serial rape, and has also had violence against women cases brought before the court and has also been convicted of that. And it's weird to me that from an investigatory point, you wouldn't automatically go, okay, what's happening in Baltimore City? Are we aware of anybody who's been attacked? Are we aware of any, complaints that there's a peeping Tom or something? Like what you would expect, or what I think I would expect, is that they would look around and say, what's been going on in the city? What type of things have been happening? Has there been somebody who is recently convicted of rape or accused of rape or anything like that? And they didn't do that. And had they done that, they would have found this person that they considered to be an alternate suspect. It's astounding to me. They also knew, which is really sad, they also knew at the time of the investigation and during the trial that a person had come forward and said this person, suspect whoever in the file, had threatened Hayes' life and said that they would make her disappear. And I was just like, at the trial, during the investigation, they knew this. 23 years ago, they knew this. And they were like, nope, Adnan's our guy. And we're going to have to falsify a lot of information to make sure he is. And that tells you the lengths people are willing to go to, especially those who are corrupt in law enforcement, are willing to go to get a conviction. It was a conviction at no cost, at all costs, rather. And yes, it could have been a random attack. It could have been just a series of attacks, much like, think about the Night Stalker, where it was random, right? The victims didn't have a lot, if anything, in common or anything like that. So yeah, it was known at the time of Adnan's, during the investigation and during the first two trials. And that's where the Brady violations come in, that they had this alternate suspect that they did not share with the defense, so that they could not reasonably then defend their client and introduce these two alternate suspects or eliminate them, etc. They weren't properly eliminated. They talk about a polygraph test that was issued to one of the suspects. And he had failed the first one. And then the second one was inappropriately administered. So he passed it. And still, this person, too, I believe, had some other kinds of crimes that were associated with like attacking women. There was one person mentioned in the motion who randomly approached a woman sitting in her car and attacked her, and then attacked a person that he actually knew. So there you have these two individuals who have this history of interacting inappropriately with women, and then you have Adnan who has nothing against him other than a kid who smoked weed, and his biggest concern was his family finding out he had a girlfriend who wasn't of his faith. That's it. And for some reason, oh, and then the other thing too that was pointed out, which is why I hark back to the city on We Own the City, the docuseries or docudrama series based on the true story of the Baltimore Gun Task Force. The investigator was a part of a case where corruption was determined to have occurred, and the motion for that person, or the sentence for that person, was also vacated. It was known at the time of the trial, and they still continued with this individual, believing their investigation was above board. Ridiculous. Okay, drink water if you have it available to you, or whatever. Let's see. I'm trying to see in the chat if there's anything. Okay. So one of the things, I don't know if anybody was watching the stream live for after the court hearing was over. They had Mosby come up, give her statement, and then Rabia and team, or Erica Suter and Rabia and them, were like waiting behind the podium, but then they all migrated to a different area for some reason to give their statement. And they were, you could hear the news people going like, that makes no sense. Like, why aren't they coming back over here? We have it all set up. Well, Heyman Lee's family attorney, or the attorney representing them, went up to the podium, and so many people, like, he was giving information and about to make a statement, and so many of those news people muted or unplugged their mics to run to hear Erica Suter. And I was just so like, oh my God, that was so cringe, because they're chasing the story. It was insane to see that happen in real life. It was sad for Hayes' family. I felt really bad for them in that regard, because people cared more about hearing Erica Suter, which makes sense. Again, it's not to shade anybody or to be like, oh my God, they should have, but everybody should have gotten like a chance to speak at the podium and make their statement, because everybody deserves to be heard when it comes to this case. But, again, it was the whole just optics of it was really terrible. But yeah, so I heard that Thiru, who, if you know, again, if you listen to Undisclosed, was also there until I think just before the ruling or right after the ruling. He ended up leaving. I was so happy he was there, because the little petty person in me was like, yeah, dude, I hope you freaking heard that. Like, finally, like, you'd been fighting this stupid fight for no reason, keeping this kid behind bars essentially, and ruining his entire life. Adnan is 41 years old now. It's so crazy. And yes, the lie detector, and Mosby spoke to that. So yes, the lie detector or the polygraph tests are not admissible in court, but they do help police reasonably. They use it as a tool within their investigation to, eliminate suspects, or to go, oh, maybe there's something more here. But there is also other things, that they use to eliminate suspects, none of which happened for the two alternate suspects entirely. Had they actually investigated them and looked into them, they would have seen that these were major red flags. Asia McLean Chapman, again, made her return back to social media. She had been gone on a hiatus for a really long time, because, again, she was given, we see this all the time in true crime, like, where people attack these individuals who are truly just trying to live their lives and do the right thing. So Asia tried to do the right thing. She said, listen, I saw Adnan in the library or whatever. She gave the information to Christina Gutierrez. Kevin Urich ends up walking to court one day and says, oh, yeah, Asia told me that wasn't true. And they never told Asia when court was going to happen so she could give her information or anything or validate her statement. They ended up going, or Kevin Urich ended up walking in and going like, yeah, Asia McClain told me that the statement she gave was false and not correct. And yeah, then the judge accepted it. And Christina Gutierrez said 0. It's no surprise, of course, that when Adnan was attempting to go into his appeals, that he was citing, um, what is it? Ineffective assistance of counsel. Christina Gutierrez did some things right, but there was a lot that she didn't. And part of that, we don't know if she would have gotten that information about the 2 alternate suspects, if that would have changed her defense strategy. But it's something that we shouldn't have to be thinking about as, a what if, because it should have happened. And for the state to say that there were no Brady violations is really ballsy, but not surprising, given that they, again, have this large history of corruption that even spans before the gun task force. Again, if you guys have not seen that series, highly recommend. Um, I really would love to hear anybody else's thoughts on it and how it affected them. So if you want to come up and share your thoughts with us about what you first thought of when you saw the motion, and also when you heard that the ruling was vacated and what that means, feel free to come up and speak if you'd like to, if you're on the Spotify Live app. Unfortunately, my friends on Twitter and on YouTube and on Twitch don't have the opportunity to do that. But feel free to put your thoughts in the chat if you'd like to, so that you can participate in our True Crime Convos. I was really, really interested in I was really hoping to hear from Rabia that day. But if you follow her on Instagram or on Twitter, she's posted some kind of behind the scenes of Adnan being home, where he's trying leftovers for the first time. Not for the first time, but like in 23 years, so it feels like the first time probably. And he's being like he's being reacclimated into the world. Think about how life was 23 years ago. This was like 1999 and on, and he's missed so many iPhone releases, first of all, right? So imagine getting acclimated to that. The internet has exploded. Just think about all of the things Uber Eats. I mean, that's what I would be going to. I'd be like, oh, I think it would be, Larry, I think you can just listen on the web. I don't think that you can actually join in on the conversation other than in the chat. You have to, if you're going to be talking on Spotify Live, you have to be in the app. I hope that helps. But yeah, I would be like obsessed with Uber Eats, because I think you see with a lot of people who have been released from prison, there isn't like a course you go into that says, here's all the things that have changed since you've been locked up and behind bars, and tell you how to deal with those things, right? Like he was he kind of just thrown into this world. So it makes sense that he didn't make a statement. I was curious to see, though. So I feel like there's something extra going on behind the scenes, maybe a Netflix documentary that we're going to see soon. Because in Rabia's post online, on her live and on Instagram, there was a camera crew present and everything. So maybe we'll get some really good behind the scenes content of what that day was like. But again, I really hope that somebody, if they want to, with Hayes family, I don't know if any of you remember this, or if you were. Oh, so Lovely, he was released with prejudice, meaning they can go back, or without prejudice. I can't remember which one it is. Charlie had to tell me the other time. Basically, they have the option to retry him, which is why they have the 30 days. Again, I don't think that that's going to happen, because I think that they would have kept him in detention if they had any inclination that he was involved. So I really honestly cannot wait for that DNA evidence. I'm sure I'm not alone in that, because I have a feeling it's going to exonerate him. I feel good about feeling hopeful, which is weird. No, if the federal government wanted to prosecute him, they would have already done it. It's not a federal case, whatsoever. I Bob could probably speak more to that than I could, but I don't think that there's anything Fed related that they would be able to prosecute him on. Um, so yeah, I don't anticipate that the federal government has any interest in Adnan Syed whatsoever. Because if they did, I think the appeals court, et cetera, would have already done something about it. But yeah, no, I don't anticipate that the federal government will be involved with it whatsoever. I do think that the DNA evidence will absolve, and because Mosby was like tiptoeing around that and was like, it will actually give factual innocence or actual innocence, so like declare it in the court. But man, I understand why the state is pissed off with her, because if Adnan, remember this too with Stephen Avery's case and um what happened with Stephen Avery's case is he was wrongfully, hey, Jack Downton, um he was wrongfully convicted the first time, right? People believe the second time as well, but the first time. So when he was released because of the DNA evidence that exonerated him, he was going after the county and the state, I think, to for millions of dollars and saying like, "Bro, you're about to pay me some money." He was basically going to bankrupt the county, and that's why people believe that that the s- that the law enforcement agencies involved with it. Oh, he is for sure going to sue the state, Madeline. Um, if the law enforcement agencies involved, that's why people believe they doctored a case against Stephen Avery. Now, with Adnan, if they do give him actual innocence and say, like, yep, you were wrongfully convicted, oh my God, 23 years behind bars. Millions of dollars. Is it worth it? Does it give him back anything at all? Give him back his time? Absolutely not. But I can understand why the state has released the statement that they did in regards to like there was no issues here, there was no Brady violations, blah blah blah, because they are pissed that Marilyn Mosby is going to cost them millions of dollars. At this point, they should be going to Anon and saying, "How much would you like?" And just write the check now because my God, that my add zeros to that because it's going to be in the millions. I honestly think like, well, I think there's a cap. I wish it was like hundreds of millions of dollars. Um, but yeah, 23 years behind bars. I think that they have to do it based off the number of years cumulative or something. I don't know if Maryland has the same statutes that some states do in regards to um, getting reimbursed basically from the state for being like, "Oh, sorry for keeping you behind bars for 23 years. Our bad," which is so stupid. I also hope that this leads to a wider investigation against those who are corrupt. Jack Downton, thanks for joining us on Twitch. We are talking about the Adnan Syed case. I thought these would show a description, so apologies. We're talking about the Adnan Syed case um, and the recent motion to vacate that was approved, and so now he's released. So I hope that this means that there's going to be also a wider investigation into, um, oh, I think Adnan should go for like $150 million to like $200 million. Honest to God, I don't know that that will happen, but I think he definitely, if he is found to be factually innocent and given actual innocence, that he is for sure going to get a good payout from the state. So I hope this leads to a wider investigation into Kevin Urich, into all of the individuals who were a part of the investigation, even down to like I said, the prosecution side, etc. Because Marilyn Mosby, one reporter was like, "What? How are you sure that this hasn't happened within your office?" And she was like, First of all, it wasn't my office at the time, so I don't take any responsibility or accountability for that." And the reporter rephrased it and was like, "Okay, the state's attorney's office." Like, that makes a difference. You know what she was saying. Um, so she said, like, we're working diligently to go through everything and especially um, the case and everything like that. So it's unfortunate that they were sitting this long on it. And if not for Robbie's work on doing this, then who knows where we'd be. And I do want to talk a little bit about cereal because so many people have a bad taste in their mouth too with cereal. And then there's other people who, like my friend on TikTok, who believes that Serial gave the best information out there. And I think one of the biggest issues I have with Serial, kind of being on the other side and seeing and listening to the Undisclosed podcast and really seeing kind of the corruption, etc. He has a great answering a question in the chat from Lovely Key, who says, I hope he has a supportive base of friends and family. He does. He has an incredible community that has been rallying against him since the beginning. So he has a great source. But so Sarah Koenig et al. Is what I say, because there are people behind the scenes who approved and did everything, right? This was a whole production. It was created, I think, by NPR at the time. I can't really remember because it's been so long. But at the time, Sarah made it a point in Serial to say she's an investigative journalist. She's going to be approaching this case unbiased. She's not going to be sharing her opinions, etc. But unfortunately, in her quest for being an unbiased investigative or reporter, rather, is that she failed to point out the things that were factually correct. That there was widespread corruption within Baltimore City, within the justice system and the courts within Baltimore City, so much so that they had a roster that was happening close to the time that Adnan's conviction had happened and the investigation was happening. It would not have changed the approach of being unbiased if she would have included that information, and she didn't. She tiptoed around it, and she basically said, I could have done it, but I could have not done it, in her story, and how she phrased and did the story. So obviously Rabia has a problem with that because she could have pointed out the things that were wrong. She could have done that, and it still would have led her to be unbiased. We see that change now in how investigative reporters who are doing podcasts are making sure to share the entire picture and speak to anything that was corrupt and, things that you can point to factually and say, like, hey, by the way, the city of Baltimore has had this issue with corruption, so much so that they have a running list of people who can't, like, testify in court because of it. There was a lot of information available, I think, at the time, even in Rabia's case files, that would demonstrate that. And she missed a lot because of it. Undisclosed does a fantastic job, as we know, of delving through every single thing that they could get their hands on and, demonstrating how the case against Adnan was flimsy at best, and that's being really kind. Largely circumstantial, which you can win murder cases, on circumstantial evidence alone. It's not that, but there wasn't anything else. The fact that Jay Wilds was allowed to get on the stand and be like, I have this story, I have this story, I have this story. And people were like, that makes sense. That's good. That's a good story. Like, yeah, I'll take that one. That story works with my theory. The fact that they withheld the facts cover sheet. And so the expert who was testifying had no idea that AT&T had come back and said, by the way, this is not good for showing outgoing calls. It's not, a good spot for this whatsoever. So it's interesting to see all of this play out. It's really unfortunate. It's a good thing. It's a good thing that's come too late, in my opinion, in some regards. 23 years, Hayes' family has believed they've had justice, and 23 years they have not. They believed justice was served, and it's the fault of the prosecution. It's the fault of the investigators who made this family believe, and, hang their hats on Adnan's guilt. So yeah, I'm interested to see how this moves forward. I hope we get to hear from Adnan soon. I hope we get to hear from Rabia soon. My dream, if I could put that out into the universe, is, you guys know I'm the co-founder of the True Crime Podcast Festival, or True Crime and Paranormal Podcast Festival. And we are known to be and I say we are known because truly I've had survivors of crimes and family advocates come to me and tell me this. So I'm not just making this up. to be a safe space for victims to share their stories and those who are, um, unfortunately victims too of the justice system, of wrongful convictions that have been overturned, etc. So my dream is to have, oh my god, could you imagine Adnan and Rabia there? I would literally pay anything. I would literally pull money from my 401k to have them there because I think it would be so incredible. Again, this is a very personal thing for me, and I don't know if it feels that way for anybody else. If you've been here since Serial, if you've been listening since then, and if you've followed Rabia, and if you've been invested in the outcome of justice for Hay being served, finally, I hope, and justice for Adnan being served, that this 17-year-old kid was railroaded by Baltimore City and not given a chance whatsoever. His entire life was taken from him. He's 41 years old. And yes, people are like, in my 40s, it was great. But he is a 41-year-old man who has to relearn everything about the world. Again, I would be excited about Uber Eats, and everything like that. And does Adnan have opportunities for him waiting for him outside of prison? Yes. Thankfully, he has people like Rabia who have been, who have created this, but there are other individuals out there who don't have that same thing. So it's really unfortunate we have these wrongful convictions, and that's why that money, the restitution to the the wrongfully convicted makes sense. Um, because what prospects do they have outside of this? They have to learn something, to do something. Um, Adnan has been making the most of his time in prison. And we know, if you were listening to Undisclosed, that sometimes those courses, and especially with COVID, or he was moved to a different prison, were taken away from him. So he didn't have every single opportunity to make the most of his time behind bars. So I know that there's so much potential out there for him, and I hope that, like I think Lovely mentioned, I hope he gets the therapy that he likely needs. I hope his whole family does. Robbie had posted recently on Twitter showing the whole family, Adnan's two brothers and his mom and dad. And she had made mention of how this conviction really broke that family. And think about too, Hayes' family. I mean, and it devastated Hayes' family and Adnan's family. They had their son ripped away from them, and Hayes' family had Hay ripped away from them too. Um, Robbie had made mention that, Adnan's, if you watch the documentary, highly recommend that as well, on Adnan's case, that the older brother had kind of like disappeared from the family because of everything that happened. And then the younger brother was sent away because he couldn't cope. So they essentially lost all three of their children when Adnan was convicted and sent to prison. So, I was so, if you watch the documentary, I don't think I've ever cried as much watching a documentary on true crime, if you will, um, than I did when Adnan's mom was talking, and I so desperately wish that she could just be with her son, or, that her son was with her. So, like, imagining her being in court and hearing that her son could be released, I literally cried. It was crazy. Oh my gosh. Thank you, Torstein Solheim. I hope I did that right. Wait, no, Norway. I don't really have a good Norwegian accent. I have friends in Norway, so that's nice. Thank you. Um, Torstein said, it is important that you talk about true crime stuff. You do good work. Love from Norway. That's so nice. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. So yeah, I'm hopeful, that we'll see some positive changes in the system. I hope that encourages other prosecutors to want to do the same thing. And I hope that in the next few weeks we get some answers on new suspects hopefully taken into custody. What I was going to tell you is about young Lee before I forget is, I mentioned earlier that I hope the family has an opportunity to share their side of their thoughts and everything. But if I don't know if any of you remember this, but young Lee had made a post on Reddit so many years ago, when Serial was blowing up, and everything. And he basically made this really scathing post being like, this is my life. This has broken my family. This is not a podcast. Like, my life is not a podcast. He reiterated that in his statement to the court as well. The name of the documentary, I believe, is a case against Adnan Syed. Yeah. It's a television series. So it's the case against Adnan Syed if you are interested in looking at it. And I'll also type it in the chat. Um, so you have it. If I can spell against Adnan Syed. But he wrote this really scathing post being like, it's my life, like it's our true life. And this was not something that was just fodder for podcasters or fodder for TV. And he kind of harkened back to that in his own statement to the court. So I don't think that they'll ever do anything publicly, like going on podcasts or, sitting for TV interviews or anything like that. I don't think that they'll do that. I hope that they get the opportunity to share however they feel like sharing it, and aren't exploited in any way, because we see that in true crime too. That, victims, it's so weird. We're talking about this now. But victims of crimes and survivors of crimes are exploited so much in this industry. People treat these quote unquote stories as public domain and say like I have every right to share your story and your experience because it's in the public sphere, and so you can't tell me not to do that. And I think that if the content creators who feel like that, um, I disagree with that wholeheartedly, and they should not be in this space. I would encourage everybody to vote with your listens, like Sarah Turney says, and if something makes you feel gross, stop listening to it. Um, Anyways, we are at the end of our time. So sorry that we went over. I know there's some fun shows happening tonight too, so I really, really appreciate you joining. Hopefully, we'll have an update here soon on the DNA results, and hopefully some arrest in Hayes case, and we see actual innocence for Adnan. Make sure, if you are interested in learning more about the podcast, you follow me on True Crime Cases. As you know, I had a name change. I'm no longer True Crime Fan Club. I am now True Crime Cases with Lanie. I appreciate every single one of you for joining me. Thank you for being active in the chat. I know that this is a really interesting case, and I will see you next week. Oh, wait. Will I be here next week? I don't know. I think I might do one. I'm not sure. I'll be traveling. I'll be in New York next week. So I'll try and do one. I may not be able to do a live stream, but I will be on Spotify Live. Anyways, I hope you all have a great, great evening. I really appreciate you joining, and I will talk to you soon. Bye, friends.